Hi, this is Nat, and this is going to be your video lesson on solving problems with percentages. There are a number of problem types that we can solve using percentages, and there's also a number of ways you can approach them. We're going to be focusing really specifically on one way because it will always work for any type of problem dealing with a percent, and that is using this proportion formula. We're going to just call this the percent formula. When you look at this, it's got the same parts all the time, and you'll need to know 2 out of 3 missing pieces in order to use it. The first and easiest part of this formula is going to be this side, and that could be on the left, it could be on the right. There's no requirement that it be the way I've written it here. But you'll always see a percent out of 100, and sometimes we'll know that percentage, sometimes we won't. But if you're ever dealing with a problem including a percent, then you'll know that at least one side of your equation needs to be a percent, known or unknown, out of 100 or over 100. The other side of this formula is a fraction, and a fraction is always a part out of a whole. And the question for you is going to be, do I know what the part is? Do I know what the whole is? Do I know both? You're going to have to know at least one of these things, and the hardest thing for most students is recognizing which one they have, particularly if they have the part and they're missing the whole. We'll look at a problem like that in a second. But the thing that I can't stress enough here is that we're going to use this formula pretty extensively, so you want to definitely have a good sense of it. It might be a good thing to write down for the rest of the lesson. So the first use that we're going to take a look at with this formula is one that we've actually done before, and I've been encouraging you to use it in class just to get some practice, and that is using it to calculate a percent. Let me give you an example. You own 8 of the armadillos in your house. Total there are 23. What percent do you own? Hopefully this is looking pretty familiar at this point. Basic idea is we know that you own a fraction of the armadillos, and we want to know what percent that is. We've used this proportion formula for this before. So the first thing to recognize is that the 8 that you own is part of a larger whole, and that whole is 23. So those are our 2 missing parts of that formula we just looked at. We have the part, we have the whole, basically we have the fraction. So I'm going to set, I also know that what I don't know is the percent. The question is a great place to look for figuring out what part you are missing. So whatever question you're trying to answer is probably going to be the missing piece. So in this case, what percent do you own? That's a pretty good indication we don't know the percent. So here's how I'll set that up. 8 out of 23 armadillos is equal to an unknown percentage. Once I have the equation set up, then I'm going to just solve this the standard way. I'm going to cross multiply. So 8 times 100 is 800. X times 23 is 23 x's, so those are equal. I'm going to divide both sides by 23 to undo that times 23. And I'll discover that my unknown percentage is going to be about 34 8/10%. So in this case, you own 34 8/10% of the armadillos in the house. Now, it's also worth noting that this is not the only way you'll see this type of problem. There are trickier ways of setting this up. For example, I might tell you you own 8 of the armadillos, 8 of the 23 armadillos, and ask you for the percentage that you don't own, so the opposite of the information I'm giving you. And there's some extra calculations there. Alternatively, I might not give you the total, but I might list the different numbers of armadillos owned by people in your house, and you'd have to sum those up to get the total. So again, lots of different ways you could present a problem like this, but they're all going to be solved using this strategy. That brings us to use number 2 of this proportion formula, or percent proportion formula, and that is finding a percentage of a whole. So in this case, we would know the percent we wanted, we'd know how much we had total, and the question would be what part would be that percent. Let me give you an example. The number of mice in my attic used to be 85, so I used to have 85 mice in my attic, but I poisoned about 80%. How many did I poison? So the first thing I'm going to point out here is that anytime you have a percent given to you, that's a pretty good dead giveaway that you've got the percent part. So here we've got 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and set up that part of the fraction, or that part of the proportion to begin with. 80 out of 100. And I know that that's going to be equal to some part out of some whole. So looking through here, the question is how many mice did I poison out of the 85 that there used to be in there? So the number that I poisoned seems to be the unknown in this scenario. So I'm going to go ahead and underline that. How many did I poison? That's unknown. That's a part of a whole, though. So we'll make that a variable. Let's do M for mice, poisoned mice. And then we've got the last thing I'm looking for is what was the whole? Well, that's the number of mice that I started out with, probably. So over here again, we've got 85 mice. That's going to be the whole number that there used to be. And so now I've set the entire thing up. Again, I'm going to finish this by just cross-multiplying. I see 85 times 80, that makes 6,800. And that equals 100 m's. I see that I'm multiplying m by 100, so the obvious solution is to divide by 100 to undo that, and I end up with the number of mice that were poisoned in this scenario was 68 mice. I poisoned 68 out of 85 mice in my attic, 80% of the group. Alright, that gets us to our last version. Use number 3. Sometimes we'll be asked to find a whole given the percentage of something and the actual amount that is. Let's take a look at what that might look like. You receive $3, which was, that should be a received probably. You received $3, which was 45% of your allowance late because your mom was out of cash. What is your normal allowance? Just like in the last problem, because I see this 45%, that's a dead giveaway that I know the percentage. So I'm going to go ahead and write that part out. I know I've got 45% of my allowance, so that's 45 out of 100. The question is, what's the other part of this fraction going to look like? I should have a part, I should have a whole. So I received $3, which was 45% of the allowance. The thing that immediately occurs to me is that it really doesn't sound like I got my whole allowance. So $3 was part of a larger amount that I should have gotten. So 3 is the part. 3 is my part of my allowance. And that leaves the whole missing. I don't know what my normal allowance would have been, so I'm going to put an A for allowance down here at the bottom of my fraction. Now again, I'm just going to need to cross multiply and solve for A. So A times 45 is 45 A's, and that's equal to 3 times 100, so 300. I'm going to divide both sides by 45 to get rid of that 45 on the A, and 300 divided by 45 gives me the value of A, which in this case is going to be 6, and 6 repeating forever. It's kind of an odd amount, but since this is money, I'm going to assume that my normal allowance is $6.67. I'll just round to the nearest cent. Again, not a normal allowance amount, I imagine, but that's apparently what this problem would suggest. So the thing that's worth stressing here is that we used the exact same formula every time. In each of these formulas, it was just the part over the whole for the fraction should be equal to the percentage out of 100, and there was one of those 3 parts in color there that we were missing on each one. So if you can figure out which parts you have and which parts you don't have anytime you're dealing with a percent question, then hopefully life will be pretty easy for you. Alrighty, and here are your practice problems for this lesson. For each of these, identify what information you have and what information is missing, and answer the question that's asked. Good luck.